Hi everyone, I'm Diana Dulek, metadata specialist at the University of Houston and GLISA VP. And I'm here with Joe Lueck from the University of Houston. He's the coordinator of archival processing, and just here to talk to him about archives and working at U of H. So first of all, can you tell us what coordinator of archival processing means?
Sure. So I started at the University of Houston Libraries last September. So I've been here about a year and 2 months at this point. Last April, I graduated from the University of Michigan with my MSI, Master of Science in Information, with a specialization in archives and records management. So in my role here at UH, I coordinate archival processing, as the job title says. But really what that means is my position was created to sort of centralize processing operations and standardize what was going on in the department. So the University of Houston Special Collections has a curator system. So a lot of the different collecting areas are managed by different curators who do the field work, the reference work, and the processing for each of their specific collecting areas. My position was created to have a centralized processing program to work through the ever-growing backlog, because our curators do really great field work and always have new collections coming in, and also to centralize and standardize our procedures across the board in terms of processing.
Okay, and when you say field work, you mean like going out and contacting donors and actually getting the materials in?
Yeah, so donor relations, making first contact, discussing negotiating terms of agreement, gift agreements and things like that.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So what got you interested in working with archives?
So I think less now, I think historically, like a lot of folks, I started out as a history major who visited the archives to do research when I was an undergrad at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. I popped into the archive for my history classes, just the collecting or the special collections on campus. But what really got me into archives, I'm kind of going to combine our first two questions here, was that I worked at the campus rec center, and I was a towel washer, and I was washing towels and taking patrons' towels, and they put their sweaty towels in the bin, and I would take them and wash them, and it was kind of gross, but it was a pretty good gig. And I had a relationship with this one patron who came in every day. I always take his towel in the morning. We'd chat a little bit. And one day I went to the library with a history class, and it turned out that gentleman was the university archivist at Bowling Green.
Oh, cool.
And so the next day that he came in, he was like, "Hey, you were in that class yesterday." And I said, "Yeah, I was." He's like, "Are you interested in archives and history?" And we talked about it, and eventually ended up taking an internship through that relationship and starting in the archives there.
Okay, I didn't know where that story was going with the towels at first.
That's the long way around.
So what was the most beneficial course you took towards becoming an archivist in grad school or undergrad, whichever?
So I've thought a lot about this question, and I guess in terms of a twofold answer. So number one would be the work that I was able to do outside of class, I think, is very beneficial. So when I was an undergrad, I worked in the archives, and then I went on for a master's in history. I also worked in the archives, continuing on in the same position there. But at Michigan, while I was doing my degree, I worked in a couple different jobs, learning about accessioning procedures, processing, field work, things like that. And there's a lot of lessons that you can learn that way that you can write down on your resume to show your experience, but also B, just to be able to use in your day-to-day work once you get into the field. But I guess the direct question answer would be a course that I took on access systems. So I'm not sure if this course would be universally called access systems. I'm not sure if you have an access systems course in the curriculum in the program.
No.
It's a course where you learn archive space, Archon, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So this access system course that I took at the University of Michigan was teaching us how to use archive space, which is a really good skill, and you can pick that up along the way, but also be about the principles of providing access to materials.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that was really helpful for me in terms of not only being able to use archive space, because that's a required skill in a lot of job postings, but also in terms of understanding the principles behind it. So thinking about the ways that we provide access to materials. So thinking critically about the description that we use, the subject headings, the other things that we put into a finding aid that bring people to our materials listed online, and then bring people either to our materials that are hosted online or into the reading room to view materials from there. So if that's not a course that's available like across the board in every curriculum, there are certainly like access courses that are available through SAA for continuing education, like description and like online access and things like that. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and it sounds, I mean, we have a practicum, so it sounds like it would be helpful to incorporate learning those programs as part of the practicum.
Yeah, and I'll touch a little bit more on that later on as we get down the board about practicums and things like that.
Yeah. So I know like a lot of archivists go on to get the certificate, like their CA. Can you talk any about that?
I could talk a little bit of it. In my program, I don't think I really even heard about the CA until I went to the Society of Southwest Archivist conference for the first time. Regionally, I think it's a lot more important down here. I know that at UT Austin, the CA is a really big thing, but I didn't even know that it existed. So there are sort of two schools of thought with the CA. There are folks who really appreciate it and really look for it when you're applying for jobs, and then there are folks who understand that it's important to get. It's like it's valuable to have on your resume, but if you don't have it, it's okay. You can show that you have that experience and that you're like an experienced archivist through other things on your resume. Okay. So it's like a certification that you could point to and say, I have that, but if you don't have it, you don't go through the process, I don't think it'll be the end of your application.
A deal breaker.
Like that,
yeah. Okay, so you've given lots of helpful information, but do you have any tips for someone who's like about to graduate?
I do.
Looking for a job in archives?
Yeah, so I guess at this point, since I think I graduated last April or May, and then I was in the job hunt, so I was pretty recent through this process myself. I think most of my tips are regarding cover letters, resumes, phone interviews, things like that.
Great, yeah.
So I have some notes jotted down right here, so I apologize if it looks like I'm just reading from the page, but I'll start with cover letters. So in terms of cover letters, it does a lot when you engage with the job posting. I have written down here, engage with the job posting shamelessly. So show interest in the position, like if a job says, like for instance, when I applied at University of Houston, I took a look at their collecting areas, and I referenced a few, like, I'm really interested in, like, the women's collection and, like, the progressive collecting areas that they have, and these new collections that came in show progress here, here, and here, and I'm interested in this because, and doing that really, it goes a long way in terms of showing your interest and then showing your, like, I don't know, your curiosity and, like, the effort that you'll put into the job.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then show interest. So you can have like a baseline cover letter, obviously, but having chunks that you place in and out for every application is essential, I would say. So like, you can be like, I'm really interested in this because I've done this, this, and this, and that can all be universal, like across your applications. But then really putting in the work, which it can feel like a lot at first. I was always very nervous to even like tinker with my cover letter and resume because I was like, this is awful. I'm never going to get a job. But once you start doing it, then things really, you get into the swing of it, and like you can produce a tailored cover letter for every position. So in terms of resume, I would say the same thing. Resumes, I always, all through school, from undergrad through grad, always would be super nervous about sharing my resume with anybody because there's always something that people will find. If you show your resume to someone, like a professor or like a colleague, they'll always be like, well, you could have done this different. And that could just be like another person told you to put it that way and they think it should go the other way. So everybody will always have an opinion. And I don't know that there's one exact right way to do a resume. Yeah. But there are a lot of things that you can do that are good and are in the right direction that will help. So I would say my biggest tip in terms of resumes is the site specifics. So citing specific projects. So like if you processed a collection at your practicum, like discussing the size of the project, even if it's small, saying like I processed the X papers, it was a 3 linear foot collection of this, that, and the other, provided access this way, we made these decisions, all in one bullet point is really helpful. And that can be like metrics in terms of any others. So like number of patrons assisted, et cetera, like books processed, research requests fielded, things like that, that really show, it shows a measure on the page that people can look at and say, oh, this is a specific thing that this person did and it affected the organization this way. So I think that goes a lot farther than saying like, these were my daily duties. So in a lot of cases, daily duties are good to have on your resume, but also having some specific numbers and like, this is what I did and here's why it's helpful. here's why it shaped my experience for this position that I'm applying for right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then I would say describe or show your impact with the specific position you're applying for in mind. So thinking about those bullet points, when I would be creating my resume or my CV, I would write the bullet points, and then I would say okay, that's it. I'm done. I don't have to do this anymore. I fit it all into the 2 pages or whatever. But going into those bullet points and really focusing your description of what you've done and who you are and what you're becoming to the specific job requirements for the position that you are applying for is really helpful. It goes a long way.
Yeah. So did you have one main bulky CV and then edit it for the different jobs?
Yeah. So I applied for jobs that required a resume and a CV. So on the CV, you can wax lyrical about everything that you've done, which can be difficult because we've all done quite a lot.
Yeah.
And then cutting it down for the resume is also difficult. I always had, to answer your question, I had a master CV, I believe, and then for each position, I would cut it down to a 2-page resume.
Okay.
As appropriate. If you're applying at a university, typically they want a CV, so you can just submit your CV. But for some other positions, some like museum jobs, things like that, they'll want a resume. Typically, you can get away with a CV, but it's good to have a no longer than 2-page resume.
Okay, that's good to know. If someone is trying to get more involved in archives, do you have any suggestions for organizations or committees they could join?
Yeah. So I would say that SAA obviously is a big one.
That stands for?
The Society of American Archivists. They have a section called SNAP, which represents students and new archives professionals. They have online chats. They do Twitter takeovers quite a lot, and they have meetups at the different regional conferences. It's a fantastic organization. They're always doing a lot of critical work in the profession. So they just did a survey of temporary employment, which is pretty intense to see the results. You can probably find that online. I saw a presentation at the last Society of American Archivists conference, which was in Austin over the summer. But I would also say to get involved with regional groups like SSA, which is Society of Southwest Archivists. I always point to my first time at SSA as my first entry into professional development and networking in archives. So I graduated last spring and went to the Society of Southwest Archivists conference last summer. So my fiance was in a temporary position at the University of Michigan where I was a student, and her term ended and I graduated, so we were both out in the job field together. So she got her job in Houston in an archive at the Mill Collection. And so I was great, so I'm looking for a job in Houston, which does make it more difficult to find a job because you can't apply all over. You're looking at one specific place. So going to the Society of Southwest Archivists conference was sort of pressures on for me. I felt like I had to shake hands and get to know people because they were going to be getting my job applications in the very near future down here.
Yeah.
But I found that everyone is extremely welcoming, and I made connections. In a way that I talked to those people at the larger conferences, which I think is really helpful in networking on a national scale. So you meet people at the smaller conferences, you get to know them. You can hang out with them or just chat with them at the larger conferences, and they introduce you to people that way. You talk about what conference sessions you're going to, and you can compare notes and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would add also that I have met Joe from work, but also through Archivists of the Houston area. I think I mentioned this in the GLISA newsletter. There could be archivists of whatever area you're in, which is a good way to meet just local archivists and network that way in your city.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where do you see the field moving?
So this is a big one.
Yeah.
So I would say that going digital is the answer that I think most people would talk about. So right now we have digital archivists who are it's a specialized position. So if you want to be a digital archivist, you take the programming classes and things like that. I think the way that we're moving is that in the future, I don't know when it'll be, sooner or later, but there will not be digital archivists and regular archivists. Everyone will just be a digital archivist because the records that people are creating now are just online or digital. So born digital records are what we're mostly collecting now. there are a lot of materials that are still in people's basements and are still unprocessed in people's backlogs, but like the Barack Obama library will be all online because all of the records that they created were born digital. So the original form that they were in was like in a Word document or in a PDF.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Can you explain? So are you saying like the boxes and folders will cease to exist? What does this mean?
So I would say that boxes and folders physically,
yeah,
they'll always continue to exist because
people will still have
photographs and things like that. And there are folks out there who would say like, well, why don't you just scan everything? Which, I mean, pie in the sky, it would be great to be able to scan everything because then people could just find it online and access would really be granted to everyone, whether or not they could get in or wanted to get into the reading room. But yes, so going forward, I think that the field will take a lot more technical skill than it has in the past. We're sort of on the cusp of that right now. I know a lot of programs have like intro to programming classes and things like that. But there's still lots of opportunity for physical processing. As I have found as a coordinator of archival processing who has come into a position where there's a huge physical backlog. So there's lots of physical work left to be done, but in the far future, there will be digital archivists who will all have the tools for that.
Okay.
And there's plenty of opportunity to learn more on that. Going back to the question about like continuing education courses, like the Digital Archive Specialist certification is offered through the Society of American Archivists. I think it's a pretty rigorous set of courses that you have to take to get that specialization, but you really learn how to apply the principles of like programming things to the actual job. So a lot of programs will like teach you how to do Python, but they don't connect you necessarily with the actual job duties that you'll be doing. So you can like learn to write a little program that says hello world, but you won't necessarily learn how to like write a program that will help you transform your metadata or like to batch edit files or batch change the names of files to best actually digital process.
I've seen a lot of webinars that are like Python for librarians or stuff like that.
Yeah, so I would say that anything like that is really good. If you could take a webinar or anything like that, you could stick it right on your CV, like courses taken, like Python for librarians, and that'll stick out on an application, I'd say.
Yeah, and I would add, don't be hesitant to take those more than once, because I've taken an intro to Python class several times, and it didn't stick the first time, and probably didn't stick the second time, but I'll continue to take it if I have to. It's
difficult to retain, like it's sort of use it or lose it in programming a lot.
I haven't needed it, so I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, you know?
Right. Yes.
So what are your favorite professional journals or websites that you go to for reference, or just like if you want to keep up to date?
Sure. So the American Archivist is like Society of American Archivists journal. There's a lot of publishing in there by like practitioners. So it's a place where some academics publish, but a lot of actual like practicing archivists write and publish. So they publish their research there. So you always recognize names in there that you've seen at conferences, and it's a lot of like concrete lessons in there. Like, here's how we do copyright for our audiovisual reproduction, and you're like, oh, we could use this and apply this to our practices. So I'd say the American Archivist in terms of a professional journal, if y'all aren't reading it already. But I would also say that smaller publications that aren't like peer-reviewed are really good. So the Society of American Archivists publishes an In the Loop newsletter, like I think it's every month. It might be quarterly, that has like just news about the organization. And I think more importantly for me, it has like deadlines for conference registration. And it's like proposals are due this date. It can be really easy for those things to slide by if you're like bogged down in your day-to-day. So reading about what people are doing on like a less formal basis is, I think, very important. The Southwest Archivist is published by the Society of Southwest Archivists, and that's really good about learning about what's going on in town and around the Southwest. So regionally, that way you get a little bit more local flavor in what people are working on and what projects people are doing, who just got a new building, like who's pursuing what initiative, and it's good to stay up to date that way.
Cool.
And in terms of finding job postings, I don't know if y'all are familiar with Archives Gig. So I would say Archives Gig is a number one must-have for finding job postings. Everybody posts their job to Archives Gig, so if you just keep an eye on that blog, you can browse job postings geographically by time, so like it's updated every day. There's several postings every day, even more so in like the spring and summer, which is like the peak hiring time for positions. So keep your eye on Archives Gig if you're not already.
Okay, and I would also plug AMIA, the Association of
Yes.
Moving Image Archivists, if you're interested in AV archiving at all. And they have a job board as well. So what is a question you wish I were asking you, or that you got asked in an interview about archives?
Yeah. This was a tough one. I was trying to think of, I was like, what is not on here that should be on here?
I mean, if I covered everything, that's cool too.
So one thing I could point back to was tips about phone interviews.
Mm-hmm.
So I get totally nervous during phone interviews.
Yeah.
And we had at my university, we had mock interviews. So you go in and they would sit there with a checklist and dock you if you weren't wearing a tie. They're like, you need to be wearing a tie. I'm like, even though this is just a mock interview, you're supposed to take it seriously.
Yeah.
But I feel like none of that really prepared me for the moments before, when I would be sitting at my desk, with my phone sitting on the table, with my notes in front of me, and the clock is going, and it's this phone interview's at 3, and it's 2:57. I'm like, come on, just right.
Yeah.
But I would say that it's not really archives specific to have that question or to discuss phone interviews, because really, if you're getting hired in any field today, you're probably going to have to go through a phone interview.
Yeah.
So to answer that question that wasn't asked, I would say that you have to really prepare to nail the why do you want this job / why are you a good fit for this job.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that really helped me after my first phone interview, where I totally botched the first question and then was off track for the whole rest of the interview, I would say to write out and practice the answer to that question. So most every phone interview that you have is going to be, it's going to open up with, why are you the best candidate for this job, or any of the number of variants on that question.
Mm-hmm.
So really what helped me was writing out, it could even be multiple paragraphs long about A, why I'm interested in the position, B, why I'm qualified for the position, and then C, and perhaps most importantly, why you're the best fit, and what's on your resume translates to how you'll be the best candidate for the role. Mm-hmm. So that's your opportunity to take what's on your resume and explain I've done X, Y, Z. I did these specific projects that were this many linear feet, or I helped this many patrons, or I cataloged this many books. And that experience led me to meet this qualification on the job posting, and then this qualification on the job posting. And that's why I would be the best fit. And I would also say that writing it out and practicing it is what helped me get through the nervousness. It's waiting for the phone to ring. I'm scaling up in terms of anxiety and whew. But anyway,
yeah,
having it written out and just having something to look at to go through, because it is a phone interview and you can have whatever you want in front of you. Mm-hmm. Having it right there, you can look back at it and you have it there if you need it. And even if you don't need it, then great. But if you do need it, it can help get you through that first section. And if you get through the beginning and you blow it away, then you'll feel good for the rest of the phone interview.
Yeah. I actually really like phone interviews because you can reference your notes, kind of like a cheat sheet, but also I write down their questions, and it just makes it easier to remember what they asked. Whereas in person, I'm busy thinking about their sweater or something, and I can't remember what they asked. Mm-hmm. So what's the most interesting thing you've come across as an archivist? So
I thought a lot about this because I have a lot of answers to it. And I was thinking of I think that my most interesting story was when I worked at the University of Michigan. So I worked at the library called the Bentley Historical Library, which is their university archives and special collections. And I worked in collections development, which means that I was an assistant with accessioning. And I did a little bit of fieldwork backup. So my boss was the university archivist, and she would always be going out to donors and meeting with them and collecting their stuff, or maybe more importantly, doing on-site appraisal and saying this would be better kept in your family papers. This is more valuable if you pass it down to your children than it is in our library, where it will sit on the shelf and nobody will see it. But one of the collecting trips that we took was to a house up in Ann Arbor where we all lived. And it was a professor's home who had passed away several decades before, but he was a professor of ancient history, and he did a lot of work in the Middle East. So in the 30s and 40s, he was doing field visits in Egypt and at like Mount Sinai. And I think it was 2017. And like it made the news that ISIS was like approaching Mount Sinai, and this professor had one of the only, he'd gone and done field work drawing St. Catherine's Monastery, which was apparently one of the targets that they were going for, like as they were approaching Mount Sinai. Mm-hmm. And so Cornell University had reached out and they were like, we've got some of this professor's papers here. The rest of it are in the attic at his widow's home. And they're there, and we want to get them online now, so that like if something does happen to the monastery, like this resource is available for people to look at, and we're for sure preserving the history of this place. So we went to the professor's widow's home, and I ended up like crawling through the attic, like pulling out these priceless drawings from Mount Sinai from this monastery, and that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
It was an interesting day.
Yeah, fieldwork people.
Yes.
So what surprised you about like becoming an archivist?
I think that the biggest surprise for me was moving from like several different student positions to one full-time gig. Mm-hmm. So working as a student, I always worked 2 or 3 different jobs at a time. So I'd like be bouncing from project to project, and I'd have a couple different processing projects happening at once. And I'd complete the processing project, and then I would move on. And I think that the biggest, not surprise really, but the biggest difference between going full-time from there is being here from 9 to 5, 40 hours a week, and having that be like the gig. So sort of designing and managing workflows so that processors can come in and do those projects. Yeah. I think that's the biggest difference. In terms of surprise, I think I always knew that time was going to pick up and go faster when I started full-time. But holy cow, time picks up and goes way faster. Yeah. When you're like doing the high-level management of processing projects rather than being in the trenches and like labeling the folders and photographs. Mm-hmm. So like building out timelines, you're like, 5 months is going to be here in no time. Like, are we really going to be able to finish this processing project by then? Mm-hmm. So really you can zoom out and see the scale of things.
Okay, that sounds interesting. Are there any misconceptions that you want to set people right about?
Nobody like who's in an archives program, I don't think. The biggest misconception about archives that I think that I have and a lot of people have is that it's like a fallback career from history or like a fallback career from going to grad school. So a lot of people are like, well, like if I can't make it through my PhD, I'll just fall back to archives and I'll just get a job in archives. But I think that it's more of a calling than a lot of like people realize. There's a lot of hard work that goes into it. A lot of keeping up with continuing education, changes in the field. And like there is a place like, I mean, I went on for a master's in history and I hope to go on for a PhD. But it's not like, I don't think you could fall back into the field and be necessarily successful. Like it's a full-on pivot and you really need to work hard, as we all know, to get a job and then also to be successful in that position. Mm-hmm. So,
cool.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to add?
I don't think so.
Okay.
So one thing that I didn't mention with the resume bit was to write everything down that you do or have done for your CV. So like, when I was in history school, my professors would say like, you did a guest lecture, like write it down. Like you were a TA and you spoke for 15 minutes in class, like write it down on your CV. Mm-hmm. And at the time I'm like, well, come on, like I'm not going to write that on my CV. But I've learned over my year here, like everything that you do counts. So like this counts for sure. Like doing a panel, I chaired a panel once where I just like read the questions that people submitted. I put that on my CV. That counts as a presentation. So really write down everything you do. If you end up cutting it down later, that's fine. But things fade fast. And I've currently been like digging through my Gmail from Michigan, like trying to find the dates of like what these things were that I helped coordinate and things like that. But write everything down, put it on the CV because it all counts and it shows your experience.
Yeah. Okay, that's really helpful. Yeah. All of this has been really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
From me and all of GLISA.
Certainly.
If you have any questions for Joe, you can email us at GLISA and we'll try to relay them and see if we can get any answers for you. Thanks for watching, and this has been great.
Yeah, thank you.